mediation and climate change, right?
Yes, I just have to find how to get to share my screen because now I'm on full screen.
Yep.
Okay.
Because of course you have spoken about, I mean, some aspect of it, but
Well, let's just talk for a minute, and then if I need my slides, I'll get my slides. I'll get Jackie to come and help me with my slides.
yeah, no problem at all. So basically, let me just also put down that this is actually the conference is World Mediators Conference, 18th May to 30th June. But what happened was, I tell you, Kathy, there was a session on neurodiversity and mediation. So there was this Martha she's autistic, and she said that we like to know what is happening, because you can see what I do when we start the session and I'm going into, I mean, on a very abrupt way, straight away starting on the discussion. So she said we should tell us what is really happening here. So now I've decided I will take that 1 minute to do that. So you okay? I hope you're okay with that.
Yes, please do. I'm just getting my slides sorted.
I'm just putting up that basic thing. This is the conference. Inaugural address by Ken Cloak was happened on 18th May. Please watch it. It's lying on YouTube. You can go to YouTube, search for Mediator Vikram. You'll find the channel. Otherwise, you can search for Mediator Vikram and Ken Cloak. You'll find the sessions. Over here, I mean, of course, Ken has been on lots of shows and events, so you can watch all of them. And of course, Kathy's here. Kathy's also been on them. You can watch her sessions. She's done one interesting lecture on poetry and mediation and in relation to climate change. So that's been interesting. So if you want to participate in the conference, please get in touch. And I hope Kathy is now ready.
Background. Get off.
But
Okay,
then
hang on just a second,
Yeah,
Vikram. I'm going to get the slides up now.
Take your time. Take your time. Lisa's here. We can say hi to Lisa up to then. Hi, Lisa.
Hi.
It's Jackie. Oh, hi, Lisa.
Hi.
Okay, never mind. I'm going to be quiet for a minute here.
No issue. No issue. So basically, Lisa, we were actually scheduling before we started this session, we're scheduling some interesting conversations. Maureen is here. Maureen was a very specialized topic: COVID vaccine and family mediation. That's some a little too niche a topic. So that should be interesting.
Very niche.
Yeah. And then, of course, Nanchang is here. He's in Nigeria, and there is a joke which is going to be repeated on Nanchang, and Nanchang has to listen to it many times. Basically, he was supposed to come in at 7 o'clock, and 40 minutes before that, he sends a message, and I said, I'm going to start it in 40 minutes. He says, India time. So that's what the joke is. So please, Kathy, are you ready?
Unmute. No, how do I unmute?
You're unmuted. You're unmuted.
Oh, I'm not muted. Okay,
Yeah.
here I'm ready then.
You want to start?
Please. Yeah.
Can you?
Kathy, you'll have to first, of course, tell us about yourself.
Oh, okay. My name is Kathy Porter. I'm a mediator with low technology skills. I don't do well with time. I could be the one who asked about 40 minutes. But I wasn't. I'm slowly getting up to speed. I work mostly on large multi-party projects with government clients who are bringing the public into that sphere of influence, sometimes called a stakeholder group. But this presentation is more about just about who those stakeholders are and how we engage them. And so it's based on some work I did on the Toronto waterfront. Government wanted to do one thing, the developers wanted to build up all the foreshore, and the public wanted to still have a place to play. So that's what these slides are about. So let's just
But
see.
but Kathy, in relation to climate change
In
and
relation to climate change.
work that you've done, other than that, I mean, your COP26 experience and all, you can maybe talk about it
Oh.
later. Okay, not a problem. You can talk about it later.
Yeah, okay. Well, COP26 could benefit perhaps from some of this. So one of the frameworks that I use for setting up a stakeholder group, and it's particularly important with climate change because so often the people who are most impacted are left out of that mediation, out of that multi-party conversation, dialogue. Decisions get made without the input of the people who are most impacted. So I like the Stakeholder Guild, and I have found that government are actually sort of interested in it because they get a broader group of people than they might otherwise have. And so in the Stakeholder Guild, the other thing is that these different, what they call capital asset groups, can influence and leverage what others are doing. So it's just one way to look at things. So that's why I like it. This is a picture of the Toronto waterfront, and just asking who ought to be involved and how do we get them involved. This is the Porter Airport. It's about to be decommissioned, but never mind, that's a conversation for another day. So, how come that won't stay there? So the other aspect of it is that within each of these stakeholder groups or capital asset groups, there are many different issues to be considered. And so this is a placemaking wheel. I think it's a useful tool in mediation to help the different parties understand the values that are driving their positions and helping them see how different aspects of any community are important to different groups of people in community. And I think as we talk about climate change in particular, we have to pay more attention to finding a balance within these different things. And, this one's populated. I think groups can begin to populate it themselves, particularly communities that live at the waterfront, whether it be a lake or at the ocean. These values are going to be different. If your home gets flooded every year because nothing is being done about A, climate change, and B, mitigating the impacts of climate change, then the conversation is going to be less perhaps about walkable down there in that bottom right-hand quadrant of comfort and image, but maybe it means boatable, or how do we get out in a boat? We could learn from Venice in that regard, I suppose. But then the other tool that I think is quite useful is this is called an ERAF diagram. It means entities. These are these big issues that people are talking about, and the Great Waterfront piece is continuing to have a waterfront. In Vancouver here in coastal British Columbia, this winter we had something called a king tide. We have beautiful walkways in Vancouver all around the waterfront. It's a ocean waterfront, an inland ocean, but nonetheless, the king tide came in and it washed away most of these paths. It pushed a huge barge up onto the beach, and now it's permanently lodged there. And these are just small issues compared to, what I'm hearing about when I go to the Congress of the Parties, the UN meetings on climate change. Not only they worried about a little barge coming up on the beach, they're worried about losing their entire communities. And so something like this can help people begin to see the connections between these different important issues. So you see, let's look at the transient entities. These are things that aren't always there. So these will be gardens. These will be farmers markets and art markets and food offerings. And so these are more mobile entities that also want access to a public space. On the other side, we have static entities. These are the industrial. These are the producer stakeholders in the Stakeholder Guild. These are the ones who want to make money by having access to the waterfront? What are the things that they're doing? They're building shipping docks, they're having industry there, they're building parking lots, they're building condominiums. But so once that gets populated by the stakeholder group, then the people work to see what the connections are between these, and the arrows are shaded to show the level of the perceived value, and then the strength of that value, that connection. So we can see, you might see that the static entities, the industries, are less interested in making the goal a beautiful waterfront for everybody. They're more interested on their return on investment, but it has an impact on that waterfront and access to waterfront. And so what I'm looking at here is the impact using systems thinking. Donella Meadows and then Peter Singh came along and stole all those thoughts from her and put them into a big book called The Fifth Discipline. And so what she wanted people to be aware of is that, if you want to have plans to build for flood protection, but then there's a delay on that, that's going to impact waterfront development, not for everybody. And so as a stakeholder or as a mediator of that, we ask whether or not the system is able to adapt to a sudden change, in this case, flooding. And then the conversation can go into the financial aspects of that. Oh dear, now what? Okay, there we go. This is just another systems map, a diagram. This one is the tragedy of the commons, one that I think we're quite familiar with. It's the loss of community space, the idea that we've lost, I think, that there is a way to find mutual benefit to such important spaces, but government is particularly interested in the tax revenue that's generated, and out of that tax revenue, they are supposed to look after the infrastructure, such as building the walls to prevent flooding, and then as that tax revenue is sought from developers as well, they have to pay a small tax. But the interesting thing that often occurs there is that developers have become very adept of negotiating what many people call the 80-20 rule. They negotiate for a 20% contribution up front. They'll pay for the connection to the sewer system. They'll pay for the connection to the transportation system, but they won't pay for the maintenance of it over time. And this is a critical point when we talk about climate change, because if you're only going to install it, but you're never going to pay to look after it, who's going to be responsible for that? Who's going to protect the interests, those common interests, if the money doesn't continue to flow into the organizations, in this case local government, who is tasked with the responsibility of maintaining that infrastructure. So it's a big, climate change brings with it big challenges and big planning questions. And of course, from a waterfront development perspective, there is only limited land available. So when the focus is only on growth, yes, eventually things are going to collapse. There will be no more land. If there's no more land, how are you going to generate more money? But these are long-term questions that often, even at stakeholder tables with skilled mediators, aren't brought into the conversation. It's about resolving that immediate issue rather than thinking what the future might look like. And in some future podcast, Vikram will talk about the benefit of bringing foresight thinking into mediation.
No.
The planning question here is will the system that you're thinking of planning, will it be regenerative? Can it care for itself? Is it sustainable over the long term? And when I use the word sustainable, I'm not talking about maintaining the status quo, able to sustain itself, which often goes to the financial. Can we continue to make money is often the underlying question there. What I mean is, can we sustain our community, our livelihoods as a society if we don't take care of these things? And one of the other planning questions is, what will happen if this policy gap is not addressed? What happens if we don't talk about climate change? And a few years ago, I was giving a presentation to a group of predominantly engineers about climate change, and there were government officials there. And one of the government officials says, but, you know, we don't have any money for that. Why would we talk about money? And I said, well, let's put money off the table for a minute and let's talk about, you know, what you need to do to prepare your community for climate change. And then let's look where the money might come from. It is a conversation, but we need to have, but let's not start with that. Let's start with something else. And so, you know, using these kinds of diagrams can help groups to see how their actions, how their choices that they make will either improve conditions or will, with a delay in policy, will contribute to the ongoing deterioration of the infrastructure. And I think one of the other really critical ones that's happening, and where there's a big gap in the climate change conversations at the global level, is there is a huge gap between what's happening internationally, big political conversations, high-level conversations at the UNFCCC and other places, but still nothing flowing back down to the local communities, to the local government, where these things are actually happening. And so one of the things that we need to do by bringing these systems thinking and other kinds of tools into the mediation process is to bring that awareness to the not only the policy gaps, but the communication gaps that are happening between different levels of government. And I'd be intrigued to hear if people think that's also happening in other countries of the world, although if I were to place money on a bet, I'd say yes, it is. So, and the final slide is just, this is called a GIGAMAP. It's developed through collaborative effort to look at all the aspects that are being taken into consideration in the planning of a waterfront that will be resilient to climate change. The different aspects, this big colorful line of maps in the middle talks about the speed at which different aspects of community change. So nature tends to change fairly slowly over time. Social culture changes perhaps a little bit quicker. Government, well, I'd say that perhaps government is in the wrong place. It's probably the slowest thing to change. Commerce changes relatively quickly, as does technology. And all of these different layers have an impact on the conversation that's going on at the table. We have an Indigenous worldview that I think we are being reminded regularly that we need to bring this worldview to the table when we talk about climate change, with the interconnectedness of that worldview, that humans, we are not separate. We need to think of ourselves not as individuals so much anymore, but the question isn't how do I, solve climate change by myself by recycling or using less water. That's not the question. It's how do I work in community so that together we can create a more resilient local community. And as we create more resilient local communities, then we have more influence at those senior tables to tell them what it is we need. So there we go. That's it for now.
Kathy, that was like a rushed up thing. You've given us an overview. You'll have to, of course, elaborate on some parts. But I think the important thing is that there's always some, in terms of climate change, that whole negative thing keeps coming up in discussion. But just give us some very nice, good example of where things have been done well, and the whole concept of communication, dialogue, consensus building has worked, and it's really happened. So we need some good, positive thing that is happening.
Fair enough. I think that's why I focus on local community, because that is where things are happening. For example, here where I live in British Columbia, there are many, many local groups who have done wonderful work on watershed management, not only in terms of putting together a comprehensive plan that can be considerate of these different stakeholder interests, but they have educated the community about why these kinds of steps are important. And I think those are the those are the places where we're having success to address climate change. So in the city of Vernon, which is near where I live, they have spent the last 3 years putting together a very comprehensive climate change policy document that covers all the local sectors. Agriculture is one of the key industries. I'm going to use the word industry here locally, along with tourism. Both of these have been and are being significantly impacted by climate change, but nonetheless, the community continues to get together, continues to take small steps towards adapting and mitigating the impacts of climate change. The gap, as I indicated earlier, is that the money from the federal government that they keep talking about is available for climate change is not filtering down to the local level so that they can begin to implement some of these very well thought out and well-informed plans. I think we are seeing also in other jurisdictions, in California in particular, looking at much improved policies around water and water use, where we have, the breadbasket, not only of the United States, but certainly significant imports into Canada, and that these small community groups are coming together outside of government circles to begin to put together programs to manage local watersheds and protect the water systems that are so important to our survival on this planet.
So I think what we need to do is one of these places where this good work is happening. Maybe I think we should have one session to actually talk about exactly how they went about it, what are the issues that came up. I mean, I think the most important, Kathy, is getting the right people on the table. So how do you identify and how do you get them? Any experience on that you want to talk about?
Well, I know both the mayor of Vernon and I know one of the senior scientists who was as a part of that process, and I know several of the people who sat at that stakeholder group. So I'm happy to introduce them to you, Vikram, and perhaps you can, if the invitation comes from you, I think it's stronger. Certainly, you can use my name, but I know people. I think they'd probably be delighted to come and talk about the work that they did, and
so let's start. So let's send a mail out to them, and our part of the conference itself, let's do it. But I just feel that this is something where you actually see some actual good work happening on the ground. I think that is what people need, something positive to take back. But because identification of the stakeholders and getting them on the table, I think for me seems to be one of the four most important steps. So if there's anything specific you want to tell us about that from your experience, other
Well, the other presentation that I'm giving at the International Rotary later today is about that very topic. And again, I think one of the things that we do as mediators, and John Wade out of Australia has done a lot of work in this regard, is we need to pay more attention to who are those parties at the table, what are their interests, so that we as mediators understand that before we come to the table. We know what influences them from an emotional level, what influences them from a financial level. It's a similar kind of elements as you have in the stakeholder, but these get more specific. So, for example, if we go back and think about those 5 capital asset groups that I talk about, and let's just pick the natural environmental capital asset. Every community has this. We need to protect our environment, but within that overarching group, there are many different interests. There are the recreational users who want the parks for playing softball. There are the watershed managers who want to make sure that the water is safe, that we have access to clean drinking water. All these different stakeholders have different priority issues. If we look at the producer capital asset group, one of their primary considerations, of course, is, are they going to make money? What's my return on investment by what I do here? Which can sometimes be in opposition to, for example, women farmers who are looking for access to farm. And women farmers are one of the largest growing groups of in the farming community. They are surpassing men in British Columbia in particular, and yet they tend to have subsistence level incomes because they're not part of the big industrial agricultural complex. So taking the time to analyze the priority of interest for each of these different stakeholders is critical to a successful mediation, because then we can begin to draw that using these systems kind of diagrams that I was talking about. We can begin to help them draw the connections. If you do X, this is the impact on me. If I do Y, this is the impact on you. That is what we do in mediation, but I think we don't often bring other tools into the mediation process. We just talk about it, which is, of course, as you and Lisa both know, which is why I want to bring the creative into the mediation process. We have to do more than just talk about things. We have to do more than just think about them from here up. We have to imagine, what is it like when you get up in the morning and you step out of bed into a foot of water? What's the impact of that on you? What's the impact when you're a senior elected political official and suddenly you get a phone call that the house that your mother lives in has burnt to the ground? These are real experiences that people are happening, but we have to find creative ways to bring these into the mediation conversation. And I'm thinking about Maureen's comments from earlier today. Mediation is such an important and under represented skill for decision making in the world. So often I do significant work with a group of stakeholders, and then the politicians go away and make a very different decision because they haven't been embodied in that experience, in that conversation, to understand the impact of the decision that they're making. So fortunately, we have people who are willing to make a stand, which is why we had civil rights in the United States and why we continue to have people making a stand around climate change, because people know that there's more that can be done than just leaving it up to government. So mediation plays a significant role there.
Because interesting, the other thing, Kathy, that I was always, I have to see how we can use technology to get in, because look, communities are affected and the large number of people who are affected. So of course, we keep talking about table. Table is not going to work here. So it has to be a space which is much, much larger. So how do we, because we want everyone to be part of that whole, whatever dialogue is happening, everyone needs to be part of it. So can we do one of these mediations on YouTube, and everyone can watch it and they can put their comments and questions in the chat, live chat? Why can't it be like that?
Well, I think there are those kinds of tools, and I've used them in mediations. One of the community engagement is a key aspect of climate change, from my opinion. And I've used a couple of tools. One of them is called Placespeak, and it's a way for members of the community to go onto their little computers or their tablets or their iPhones and indicate their preference over a broad range of topics. And that information is then gathered and brought to the stakeholder table for consideration. I did one around transportation planning in Alberta a few years back, and I used another system called MetroQuest, and we created these big maps. We asked a number of questions about different kinds of transportation, from cycling and walking to cars and trucks, and the city was adamant that nobody rode their bikes. It was too far to ride to the next town to go to work. Biking wasn't really of interest, and they were stunned when the map that came back after this broad community engagement using this technology system with pictures and with questions and with places to prioritize their answers, that cycling came out as one of the key priorities for citizens, not only for recreation, but for commuting to work, because the community was very concerned about the impact of climate change on their ability to get around. So absolutely, Vikram, there are wonderful tools out there that help take that conversation right out into the community. We had over 1,000 people participate in that particular survey, and we put little icons on the map to show where people wanted their cycling routes to be connected. And the city was just stunned that they had made assumptions that this wasn't something that was important to their community at all, and they were very, very wrong. And I know that we have that same information. We would get that same information as if we asked questions about, well, I'm not going to go to the obvious one in the United States right now, but questions about fire prevention, fire adaptation. We would get a lot more perspective to be provided for government when they use these tools.
Yeah, because I think that is the most important thing, to that community engagement on a full level. It's not that, because actually the problem I see is that you say so and so will represent us in the mediation. Does the person really represent you? That aspect, yeah.
Well, we could have another whole conversation about that, because one of the interesting things is, of course, is that if, let's say I'm the stakeholder and I represent the environment at this table, and I'm the only one, I also have to deal with all the conflict of the people in my own group and the other groups that are representing the environment. That's something entirely, that's going on behind the scenes. And I come to the stakeholder group and I'm supposedly representing the environment. Well, I'm not. I'm representing my particular interests and the particular interests of the group that I represent, and nothing more. And then I have to turn around and I have to, pitch whatever it is I'm supposed to pitch to this other stakeholder group. I think we need to stop thinking of stakeholder groups as one circle of people, and we need to start thinking of stakeholder groups as concentric circles of groups of people and groups of people with particular interests. I think it's one of the flaws of the UNFCCC and the negotiations that are going on there. All those people who are sitting at the table facing each other across the room with their country flag beside them are representing so many interests, but they are only given the tasks of representing the particular position of their government. And that's why they're there. They're not really there as a stakeholder. They're there as a mouthpiece. And until we begin to address that at the climate change talks, I'm not sure we're going to make much progress.
Yeah, because the people who are affected by it are never actually heard in that sense. No. So I think that how do we, again, I'm going back to using technology. When you have technology at your hand, why can't they be participating in those discussions? They don't have to be sitting on a table, but they can still participate, being part. And because for a mediator, you want to speak to whoever, whoever as part of the larger group. It's not that the person who comes across as the person representing. You want to, maybe some person is an influencer in the group and is not up there in the on the table, but you want to talk to that person. So it should be open, and you should be able to bring all of them in. So how do we do that? I think seems to be the challenge, and the solution is what Kathy is going to give us. Tell us, Kathy, how do we go?
Well, again, it comes back to identifying who those stakeholders are. I'll give you a really concrete example. We have a large river, the Columbia River, that flows out into the Pacific Ocean in a coastal city called Portland, but it starts up here in Canada. It's a huge fishway, commercial fishway. And for many years, a group of stakeholders were getting together, and these were Indigenous peoples, environmental managers, government officials, getting together month after month, week after week, to see how to bring the salmon up, allow them to migrate up the river all the way into British Columbia again from the Pacific Ocean. Now, some of these people had significant conflicts with some of the hydroelectric producers on the river who were less interested in providing infrastructure for the salmon to come back up the river. Guess what? They were not at the table. The major owner of the dams on the Columbia River were not at the table. Now, how can you negotiate? How can you mediate a solution when one of the people, one of the groups, if you will, the industry in this case, were not at the table? How can you do that? It's impossible. It's impossible. And this was quite a while ago, and recently the US has just announced that they're beginning a process of taking those dams down. Well, that's a major step forward from a climate change perspective, so yay.
Yep. Some victories, small victories or big victories, whatever they are,
All
is
victories.
important. Yes, yeah, that's important. But what I mean, I don't know. I still feel that in terms of the whole concept of valuing interests, I think someone says I have to play softball. I want a space to play softball against someone else's interest, which be something else, whatever they are. How do you value that part of it? How do they value it? Or how do you go about that?
Well, I think there are many factors there. One of the critical early ones is to begin to build trust. So, and one of the way, how do we build trust? We build trust by beginning to understand who that other person is. Who are you? Tell me what your interests are, even if they are different from mine. I have to be able to hear what your interests are. And if I can begin to hear what your interests are, then I stand a better chance of having my interests heard by you. But again, I think when we rely predominantly on talk and conversation, we do a disservice to those people because we don't allow the individual whose way of thinking is more creative, more artistic, more emotionally engaged. How do we provide them for a space at the table? It's the kind of work that Lisa does, bringing that creative into the mediation space so that we have more tools to make sense of the different perspectives that are sitting around the table. And it doesn't happen quickly. That's why people want to go to court, because they want somebody to make a decision, because I'm right and they're wrong, and make a decision and let's get the heck out of here. Mediation is a more nuanced process. We have to take the time to listen to each other, and people are more and less capable of listening to each other. And I think part of that is because that we don't draw on these creative aspects of our humanness that I think we have, to a large extent, lost sight of. And I know a lot of artists and creative types are getting on board with communicating messages about climate change. And, to your point, Vikram, often this tends to be the negative aspects, the harmful impacts of our changing climate. And we spend less time focusing on the joyful aspects of how we are working together. We're not bringing our spiritual selves to the table. We're just bringing our intellectual selves with all the weight that has been given to that particular aspect of who we are as humans. We need to broaden our sense-making tools. We need to be able to sing together. We need to be able to dance together. We need to be able to share in that space. Years ago, I was mediating up in the Alberta oil sands with a group of Indigenous storytellers, because I wanted to bring those stories into the stakeholder table so that the industry people could see that there's more than just, I want to use your land and I'll give you some money in exchange for it. That was such a limited view. And at the end of this day of storytelling with a group of Indigenous elders and people, they had a dance. We had food and we danced, and I could hardly walk the next day. My feet were so sore. But we need to bring these kind of, joyful human activities back to the mediation table. I don't know how to do it.
But we moved away from the mediation table. Now it's called the mediation tree. Bring them under the mediation tree. That's the mediation tree. Yes.
Okay, mediation tree. I think that's great. I kind of see it more as we throw a pebble in, and we see all these circles going outwards, and we need those outward circles. We need that outward circle information to come through number of circles into the center circle, and we need the center circle conversations to go out through these rings out more broadly into the community.
Okay, so you give some other term. I'm okay. I just like the mediation tree concept because this was happened with Sarah. She's in Australia, so we were having a discussion as part of the Heart Soul Spirituality Symposium, and this is where we came up with, let's call it the mediation tree, and that's where in this conference she spoke about bringing people under the tree, so that we had one session on that. But you have to remember, Kathy, 9th of August, that symposium on indigenous peoples and mediation is going to start. You have to bring in people, indigenous people, to come in, talk about how they go about it and the experiences that people have had in with indigenous peoples and whatever other, I mean, whatever has happened actually, some examples. We have to bring them in. So there's enough time now. You can't even say there's not enough time. 9th of August, that starts.
Yes, sir. I will send out some invitations.
Yes. Now Lisa wanted to come in. Lisa, please.
Well, hello. Kathy, so wonderful to hear you.
So great to see you. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. So I know Vikram will say I have to introduce myself, so I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Lisa Singh, and I've been a mediator since 1996. And with regard to this topic, I've done a lot of work in the environmental arena, mostly through community mediation. I've done a lot of work within our own community for environmental spills that were there. I actually can do an environmental impact statement because I've been related to that. And I've also worked on the policy development, some policies in the area. More recently, I have engaged through the Climate Reality Project of former Vice President Al Gore, and I've been trained in that. Well, not the word trained, educated. And and I also have been working with the Environmental Pollution Agency, EPA. They do a series of workshops on environmental justice. And this is just speaking to what you just said, Kathy, to try to get people who are most impacted by the environment are the poor, minorities, and they have the greatest impact, and yet they've had no say. So the idea of the Environmental Justice Academy is to start trying to bring in those voices and give them leadership. So it's more of a bottom up, and then help them, give them information so that they know how to access funding, so that they know how to access projects, so that they can look at the projects that are needed in their communities and access funding and lead those. And so this was the second group of workshops in the United States. So I don't know what's going to happen so far, but I really like the direction that's happening, because I think, you know, when you look at it, I'm reading a book right now by Séverine Althusser, and she writes The Front Lines of Peace. And for her, what she's seen is that peace is all about these biggies get together and they say, okay, here's peace. But the little people, the ordinary people are not included, and peace, it falls apart. And if you go down to the grassroots and create peace there, in fact, she gives examples of communities where they have come together, and even in the midst of a war within a country, those communities aren't as impacted because the citizens came together to stop that. And so it's the same thing with climate change. If we have it from the grassroots level and the citizens have the power, they can determine the outcome. So I think that that's the direction that I'm moving in. I want to see, how can I create that dialogue? How can I move into creating more dialogue at the community level and getting more community members and giving them access and giving them the ability even to access funding in whatever ways possible, because I think that's really what we need to do, not having big people come together and say, this is what we have to do, but having all the people come together and then mediating between, let's say, corporations or whatever, you know, so that people have a better outcome.
Absolutely. I think that's the important thing, that everyone should be heard. Everyone has to be part of it. That one little house on one little corner gets affected, that is important. It's not that, I mean, that person can be left out. So I think,
Yeah.
and these, and there are, I mean, and there is so much in terms of what needs to be done. So for each individual, there will be some action required somewhere, which won't be spoken about because the individual never came up and that voice did not come up. So I think I'm saying let's use technology. Let everyone be part of it. Let it be open. All these I'm saying in general, all the dialogue that has to take place. That is, all that closed room dialogues was something that maybe because of the situation at that time when the concept started, there was no option. We have the option now that the whole world is now one room. Everyone can be part of that conversation. But only thing is, Lisa, now in the whole thing, I am not required. I've understood. Now Lisa says, Vikram is going to ask me to do this, so I'll do this. So now I don't really have to be part of the conversation. Said Lisa, now Vikram will tell me to introduce myself. So let me introduce myself. So Vikram doesn't have to open his mouth now.
I'm sorry, but I know you. I know you so well now.
That's what I'm saying. Maybe it can now happen on autopilot. The entire discussion. Vikram would have asked this. Vikram would have said this. Finished. Done.
Uh-oh. You may have me trained.
Oh my God. That's the training. Yes, that is a training. That is where skill
I'm
was
so
not.
automatic.
Exactly. But in whatever Kathy has said, anything that you want to, I mean, is there an actual experience that you want to talk about, a positive one that you want to talk about, and how it was done, something?
You know, how it's done. I mean, I have like when there's a spill, for instance, an environmental spill, this is a big thing, right? And you really need to have the community involved with that. You have to, what I've done is really, when there's a spill, we bring the community together, give them the information about what it is, and then let them have a voice, because they need to have a voice. But beyond that, they also, it's very important that you're connecting and making sure that there's follow through and there's safety. But then I think the larger issue now, and what I'm really working on, is what are those processes? Because I believe that if we don't find a way to come together, we're all going to lose, because I think the environment right now is headed in a direction where it's maybe going faster than we even thought it would, to a point where we can't return, and we don't want to get there. And now at this point, we have to find ways to really get people to talk, and that's what mediators do. So I think mediators are more important right now than any point. And I'm working on how can we get in there? How can we get to the grassroots level? How can we get people to open up so that we start to have these dialogues, and they're all over the world. They can't just be in one region or the other. And we have to get beyond, you know, power politics. We have to get beyond ownership. So it may require a different way of thinking for the world. I don't know what that is yet, but I'm working on what are those processes. I'm reading anything I can read so that we can put out, you know, what are different ways to approach the problem that will give everyone a chance, because I think it's very important right now. And I don't think people realize how important it is. I mean, look, how hot is it in India right now? I mean, you were so close, Vikram, you were so close only a couple of weeks ago of reaching that point where people start dying. You were only lucky that there was enough moisture in the air, but the temperature was right on the edge of, if it just fluctuated a little bit more, you'll start seeing birds drop dead from the sky. I don't want to ever see that.
Yes, Lisa, things are serious. Now, the way Ken puts it, that when bacteria is multiplying every second, when the cup is half full, the next second is going to be full. So we are at that last second, are we? So that's how it is.
Yeah, no, that's scary. I mean, it's scary to me, and to be that close, you know, I don't want to see that happen to any place in the world.
But I think,
Can I ask a question?
Kathy, please.
So Lisa, I agree. I feel like I'm in the same place that you're at. It is scary. We lost more people in the heat dome in British Columbia last year than almost any other cause. And so it's here right now. And I think the other thing that's happening is because it's here right now, we've been talking about it for so long, and then here it is. People are afraid. They don't know what to do. They don't know where to turn. How do we get, and I think that's why we see a rise in populist governments, because people are so afraid they want somebody else to make the decisions for them. They don't want to be involved anymore. They did their recycling, you know, they did their water conservation, and nothing changed. How do you think we get those people back to the table again? And to table, what by table, Vikram, I mean tree, pool of water, etc.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I'm working on that. I think we really have to start at the grassroots, and then, like, how many people are demanding an electric car? You know, they're still taking gas guzzling cars, for instance, right? How to get past that to see, you know, that when we talk about consumer items, you know, what we consume and what we ask for, that's one part of it. But then the other part is how can we also within our own yard, you know, give back in the little things. And we have to look at every little part of it, you know. I think that taking a blaming, sometimes this is the problem, that we start to take a blaming view and that turns people off. And then we're not working together. So we can't take a blaming view. We have to understand that there's different perspectives. Business is going to have a perspective. So we have to also educate people to be open to listening to those perspectives so that we can work together and not say, well, you're doing this and you're polluting or you're doing that. You know, we can't do it that way, because that breaks us down into silos. And we don't want to be in silos. We want to be a system that is working.
I do
You
how
know
I'm
what
looking.
happens with the silo? Oh, sorry, Vikram, go ahead.
Please,
No, that's okay.
Kathy.
She and I are talking the same language.
You know
Okay.
what happens with a silo is it becomes feed for the cows, and then they fart and we have more methane. So we definitely can't be in silos. But you know, I think the other thing is that we have to even move away from the conversation about electric car. And I'm guilty.
Exactly. I was just going to say that. I was good.
But we have to look at what is in the service of the community as a whole. So it's not about electric cars. It's about what kind of transportation systems can move people to where they need to be in a safe and secure manner.
Yeah.
You know, trains used to be that, but then we got into our individual cars and went about doing our individual thing and didn't talk to people anymore. And I think this has been, so we're not just talking small changes here. We're talking mindset changes that are almost beyond our comprehension. We have to think collectively. We have to end the me generation, the I identify.
Yeah, actually, I mean, and to be honest, I've worked on so many projects now when I did a lot of the creative problem solving with Idea Connection. And you could have a gas car, but you could put money and dollars out there to make sure that it's not polluting. You know, it's finding creative solutions, and the creative solution that on one side doesn't have to be one size fits all. It's about what is the ultimate goal for the environment. And if we can put money into research, now they're finding ways to have not plastic bags, but bags that can be broken down. Like, what is the problem? What are the solutions we need? I did a project for a reservoir, and there's a reservoir in Australia. They wanted to find a way to put something over the surface because of the global warming, they were losing too much of the water, and water is going to be a big issue in the future. Not enough water. So they wanted to find something they could put over the top of the water so they would not lose all of the water to evaporation. And the scientists found a solution for that didn't kill the fish, because that's part of it. It had to be able to find something that wouldn't kill the fish. I had a really great idea for that, but nobody took my
Okay,
idea.
later on we'll get your ideas. Well, Lisa, the thing is that the fact is the larger thing has to be looked at. You might cover your reservoir and you might stop evaporation, but someone else is dependent on that evaporation because they are going to get rain based on that environment. In that, so everyone is so connected that we should not lose sight of that person who might not get rain because you did this, because you had this fear that my reservoir is going to dry out. That person is
Yeah.
going to be dried out today. So I think that also are we looking at the larger picture? Or are we now look, we have to look at it two ways. One is we keep saying the communities, let's talk about the communities. The last person there has to be looked at. But then does that interest also in one end go against the interest of someone else on the other end? And that connection, first of all, do we know all the connections there are? Or
Well,
between
probably not. These are complex things. Listen, I love this conversation. I love talking to you both and to anybody else who joins, but I have to now go and lead a meditation for another group. So love you. See you soon.
Thank you, Kathy. We'll fix up some topics and we'll have you coming back again. Thank you very much. Always a pleasure seeing you. And we'll
Thank
see
you
soon.
so much. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye. So I think what basically Kathy is also looked at, talking about that. Let's look at some maybe those larger changes, but that's the changes that have to. Where is the mediation?
You have
These
to
are
look at both though, Vikram. You have to say, okay, here's the problem, here's a solution. And then you have to say, okay, will this solution then impact something else? So you have to have both.
No,
And
whatever.
they have to work together in tandem, but you can't say, well, we can only look at big picture. We can't look at small things. You have to look at small, then big, then small. We have to go back and forth.
But that's what I'm saying, that some small will affect some other small somewhere. Some small will be the larger. But that's about those are creative solutions they're talking about. We're talking about mediation part of it. And for me, like I said, those elements of stakeholders, identifying stakeholders and getting them
mediation
together.
Part of that is really about just getting people to talk to each other and finding a format, so that they're heard and they're listened to and that they're talked to, and that's where, because communication starts breaking down, especially in the environment. We find a lot of the wars, some of the wars that start are a direct result of the lack of resources that come from climate change. So, how do we then make sure, because if people are not talking, and if they're fighting because they don't have resources, that's not helping. So if we can mediate before it turns to a war, if we can find those solutions beforehand, and we can help people become more empowered, then we're going to have less violence as a result of the tremendous changes that are happening.
But interesting, there's that whole movement that has on the soil there's a movement that Sadhguru had started on how.
Yes, I know, it's wonderful movement.
Yeah,
the soil movement, get soil movement, and there's a big meeting in Delhi.
Yeah, it's coming up on the Sunday. So the main thing, yeah, might be. I don't know. Look, I can't decide now because of the weather. you know what? Today, when we're talking about, of course, how we are affected, I started my game today at 39 degrees. And I said, maybe we have to just adapt to the change in the climate. How much it's going to take a long time for us to maybe make those changes, but we have to adapt to it. So at 39 degrees, I started 39 degrees centigrade. And how it went on when I played. So that's how bad the situation is. So because that's going to happen in the evening, they say, but evenings are not cool here. Evening not becoming cool. It's not that we used to have quite a dip in temperature in the evenings. It's not happening. Although today it's come down to 36 right now at 8 o'clock.
It's so serious because it's only going to get hotter if we don't do something now.
Yeah, because tomorrow, I like at 6 p.m. also, it's going to be 39 degrees. Okay, so these are the issues. But otherwise, in relation to the mediation process or any example that you want to give us, something specific that you have seen, like I keep saying, some positives that we have to keep talking about, because that is something that is missing in the conversation. It's always about this is happening, this should not happen, and all that. But some little example somewhere where you saw that the community got together, everyone's voice was heard, and a solution came out which was good for everyone. We want to talk about
I
that?
mean, actually, I have seen, because as a result of like let's say this training, well, I see so many groups now forming and so many groups meeting and starting to talk to one another, and that's spreading very quickly. And then even in this environmental justice group, we have 5 projects started in the community now. That's huge. And this, this is part of that. One of the things that, I mean, I taught in the academy was, of course, conflict resolution. So we taught everybody how they can have those conversations with the community. And then one group has gone out into the community to bring in the voices, and using those techniques that we taught, they actually invited the mediation center to go down and talk to between the companies there who are polluting and the members of the community to have a conversation. So that's ongoing right now. I don't know what the result's going to be, but they're already looking at their community and what they want it to be like, and then talking to the businesses in the community. So that's an example.
Because I'll tell you what, how, I mean, of course, you heard me saying this, I put it across. For me, identifying those with the mediator mindset in all communities everywhere, and those people creating their whatever, whoever those stakeholders are, getting them together there at that, at a micro level, the right people, that reasonable voice, that impartial person sitting there, and that then, because they can create that consensus between that group, which will be a small group, and slowly, because those people will be involved, that whole becomes a larger consensus, then becomes a larger consensus, and that's what
Exactly.
when Kathy spoke about that ripple thing, inward, outward, outward, inward.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I'm seeing, as a result of this, which I find very exciting. And I don't know, in the long term, but it's definitely supported in our area and getting some support. And so I find that positive. I didn't expect it to happen. Um, and I, even to the extent that voices that, well, let me say, one of the speakers who talks about one of the voices that has to be at the table and that is not representative is the earth. Who's going to be the voice of the earth, right? And this, so we even brought in someone who talks about, I'm going to be the representative for the earth. So even that is at the table now. And I thought that's very exciting, because that has to be at a mediation table.
Absolutely.
Why, what we can argue about all the things about what's needed, but why isn't the earth represented?
Yeah. Okay. I was just checking while I was talking to you. You said whether I should go for that Sadhguru's event. That Sadhguru's event is at 6 o'clock in the evening. The prediction says at that time will be 41 degrees at 6 p.m.
Oh, oh. It has to happen. I'm very excited about that. I mean, actually, my relatives are, they're like pushing it really hard, and I'm happy to see that.
Because the kind of, if you watch one of those videos, that whole thing that wars are going to take place because of this, so much
They are.
reduction in production of that, the nutrients are going and all that. So I mean, one of those things which, well, I don't know how soon people will understand, because obviously some people will still get away with a lot, and some people are going to suffer. How long are they going to suffer? With anything, I mean, soil is one thing, or whatever, all these environment related issues. So I think there. So basically, what we'll do at this point is, these are maybe, if there is something in terms of the concluding, closing remarks that, let's call it closing remarks, that you want to give, please give it, and let's close this here.
I mean, I can't speak for Kathy, but I can speak for, I think that, mediation is very important right now, because I think more important than ever at this moment in time. So anyone who has the skill to bring people together, and anyone who has the skill to help through these difficult conversations that have to have, should be invited into the conversation and should be welcomed, and should be, actually, we should treasure them, because it's something that we need. And so I think that it's time for us to change our thinking, because times can get really hard.
Yeah.
41 degrees,
At 6 o'clock in the evening.
At 6 o'clock in the evening. I don't even want to imagine it.
Look, like I said, you just have to tell yourself this is what it's going to be. So you just start getting used to it. So like I'm saying, whether I should go or not, maybe I should go at that time. Like I said, I did play golf. I started my game at 39 degrees. Otherwise, I could have just, oh shit, it's 39. I'm not going to play. No, we'll just have to get used to it. This is going to be life. Maybe we just have to do that. But this aspect that you're saying is now in a way that you're agreeing with what I've been saying for so long, that everyone who can actually get people together, the person with the, what is it? The person with the mediator mindset, that is what it is. All of them are important. They have to be valued. Please value them, identify them, bring them out. They're all important, and they will create that little conversation around them. How big that conversation can grow, we don't know. So let's do that. So Lisa, thank you very much. Anything else you wanted to say something?
No, yes, I do. I want to say to everyone, notice the pottery in back of Vikram, and just think how that represents the earth. It comes from the earth, it represents the earth, and it's a beautiful, beautiful backdrop for this conversation.
And I tried to put in, I put some green here. There's some green and brown here in this one, and there's a blue there. I tried to bring some symbolic thing there. I do that little bit. No one always notices, maybe, but I still keep playing with these things myself. So thank you, Lisa. And of course, we'll continue our conversation. Let's just cut the live stream.